Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, this video is long overdue. A little over a month ago, I ran a solo session for Runeslinger for Anthony in our all-for-one Regime Diabolique campaign. So finally, I ran a solo session for Martin, and that's been our agreement as we're running the campaign, as we're sharing the GM's chair, that when a person has GM sessions, the other GMs will run a solo session for them at some point. And so that's been a slow process. But that's happened. So it was my turn to run something for Anthony. And I wanted to talk about that session because it's been our tradition, our habit, and a very good habit it is, to make reflections and recap videos afterwards. And it's, I've found in this game, I've taken that concept and used it in other games because it really helps the discussion between the players and it really helps to bring things together. And sometimes we miss certain things, or it's nice to talk about the nuances and what have you. This was a session that I went into with a certain amount of trepidation. Maybe that's not the right word, but I was a little nervous about it, and there were a couple reasons for that. I mean, first of all, I haven't run or done a lot of one-on-one sessions in my career, despite the fact of being involved with role-playing games since a long time ago. Even though I took some breaks, but even so, I just don't think I've played a lot of one-on-one. And there's a certain amount of comfort in having a larger group because the interactions between the various players carry an awful lot of the dynamic that happens in a game. And to all of a sudden have just one player, it's much more of a conversation. And it's a little bit more intimate. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's probably the right word. It's a very, it can be an intimate conversation between you and the other player as they play their character. I was looking forward to it, but it's a little bit, there's a little bit of pressure involved with that. Or, maybe it's not real pressure, but I felt a little bit of pressure. The other thing that I went into, or reason I went into it with a bit of trepidation, was because, Anthony really likes this game. This is one of his favorites. It's something he promoted quite a bit. It's something we've talked about an awful lot. And not only that, but I have a great deal of respect for Anthony. He is somebody that has opened up my eyes to a whole bigger world of what constitutes what's going on in role-playing games. And because of that respect, I wanted to do this justice. Not just any game, but a game that he really, really likes, and a game that we've had a lot of fun playing. So I was a little nervous. But the session went fine. It was actually a very relaxed session, and I'm glad that we got to do some of the things that we did. One of the things that happened in our private Facebook group, because we discussed this game a lot, off and on, is Anthony made a little private video for us and said, "Listen, one of the things I want you guys to do is to make me describe, to narrate, things like combat and." Because they're musketeers, quite a bit of flair, and to narrate a little bit more of the magic, because he just kind of felt like he was getting a little flat with his character. And so I was glad that I got a chance to introduce some elements into this session where he had to do that. It was more so the combat than the magic, and he really mopped up the floor with the people that he met. I mean, had he actually encountered a couple of other people in the adventure, so to speak, in the scenario, it would have been a lot more challenging. But it was really kind of neat to see him, kind of come into his own as a musketeer and really just show what he could do amongst a group of ruffians. So that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed getting him in that situation and seeing what he would do with it. The other things we have been discussing for a long time, like literally, I recall this messenger conversation Anthony and I had about his character and the things that were going on with his character well over a year ago. I remember exactly where I was at my whole job as we're quipping back and forth, and he made some references to the fact that his family, he had at least one relative who was a good guy, who trained him in the arts of magic, and somebody that was more of an inspiration. And we talked about it was an uncle. And he just had this kind of concept in the back of his mind, but we never really was able to bring that to the forefront, or at least expose it in the game. And also, magic in all-for-one Regime Diabolique is difficult. It's time-consuming. It's very cool, but it's a time-consuming magic system. It involves a lot of prayer, and so that's what Martin spends a lot of his time in prayer. And we talked about the idea that he needed a mentor. He needed at least an opportunity to talk to somebody. To get him a little bit more grounded in what he should be doing, and not only that, but there are artifacts. There are things like grimoires. There are books that are available, or there are a mechanical device which can help reduce the amount of time that it takes, because that's literally all he does. All work and no play makes Martin a very dull boy. And so these were elements that, like, if we were playing in a more consistent campaign where it was face-to-face, or if we were just playing every week because we lived on the same side of the planet, all that sort of stuff, because the schedule between the three of us now is difficult. These are things that would come up a lot more naturally, organically, or they would have come up by now. So we talked about stuff, and I just had in the back of my mind, if nobody else does this, I really want to introduce these elements because I believe it would really help flesh his character out. So I was glad to kind of bring, I had this idea kicking around in my head for a long time of a friend of his uncle's. So it was neat to have this guy come from the Vatican, come and say, hey, listen, I've been watching you. And there was actually a role where Martin asked him to, like, can you help me? And he failed it. This guy's still going to stick around. He's living in Italy, and Luciano. One of these great things that also happened, outside the game, was I was talking to Noel Inquisitor about his character, and we were talking about the good time we had when he was part of the game, and I asked him about Luciano, his lackey, for Jean-Marie, and he said, no, you know what, he didn't take Luciano with him. Luciano's probably a lackey for somebody else over here. So I got to introduce that character back into the campaign, and now he's just kind of hanging out, being a doctor for the Musketeers. And so now this fellow that came to check out Martin has somebody to drink Italian wine with, which I thought was pretty funny. But the session is called "A Tail That Wags a Dog," and one of the things I really like about All for One is these lackeys, and you can do so much with them, and they become such an essential part of the game. Eugene, we already talked about that during RPG a Day. And in fact, I believe Anthony talked about Eugene, and I think Francois might have talked about her too. She's quite a character, but Claude is another really kind of interesting character. That's Martin's lackey, and I wanted to examine just what it was like for Martin as a noble, and having this lackey who was kind of taken out of a fairly decent situation. Martin became this hunted member of his family, but he came from some sort of nobility, and while this was traumatic for him, just think about how traumatic it was for poor Claude. Claude, who was a coward, but he was a really smart guy, really good at research and figuring stuff out. And so, what better thing for him to do than to be making some plans behind Martin's back? And it was great that Anthony kind of ushered this a real great way to bring that in when he had this one scene when he was running for us, where Martin and Aramis just walk by, and Aramis is telling him he's got to get married to somebody. That's his ticket. Back into the nobility. So what better person to bring in than Bazin, the lackey of Artemis, or Aramis, and having them sit around the table, when Martin comes home. And it was also neat to reintroduce this character Isaac that I kind of threw in the Cardinals Guards. Somebody that I threw in when I ran my first session. I said, this is somebody that I hope gets some more airtime, because I made him somebody that's kind of teetering on he knows something's rotten in the state of Paris in this case, and so somebody was kind of an interesting ally. And I poked at Martin a little bit before, but it was neat to have him there, and he almost died during the combat. It was pretty cool. So it was just neat to have this really relaxed session with Anthony, to really throw a bunch of things his way that had to deal with, in many cases, lackeys. People, because once again, it wasn't that now I'm forgetting the character's name. Isaac showed up. It was his lackey that showed up to go get Martin. There was a young boy at the church that was I used him a different way than I thought I was going to, but it was just neat to have these minor characters involved in the entire thing. All these people that are kind of behind the scenes in the life of a noble. And because Martin's a great character, and I think that side of his character doesn't get enough airtime. So it was really kind of neat to explore that. And so it was a relaxed session. I didn't have a lot of plans for it. I just had a bunch of ideas, and I figured, well, let's just go ahead and let's go do some role playing. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing it. We don't get to play that game anywhere near enough, and I'm very interested to see what Francois has cooked up for us, because he's rewatching a bunch of the sessions and plotting some stuff. So I'm sure we're going to get ourselves into quite a bit of trouble now, because the game is heated up. But yeah, long video about a good time, but it was overdue, and I really enjoyed the session. I was happy with the way it turned out, and you know, my fears were unwarranted. But it was a session that was important to me because, you know, Anthony's become a, you know, for lack of a better word, a good friend, and somebody that I have really learned quite a bit from, and have a great deal of respect for. So, you know, I wanted to make it worth his while, or, you know, wanted to live up to, you know, just how important that game is to him and to me. So that's it, folks. Talk to you later.